You've been bored today. Maybe scrolling, maybe staring at a wall. Now imagine that same feeling 40,000 years ago, trapped in a cave, no phone, no light but a fire that might go out. What would you have done with your hands for the next 6 hours? For most of human history, there was no boredom the way you know it. There was only downtime. And downtime, for a species that hadn't invented distraction yet, was one of the most dangerous and most productive states a human being could be in. Here's the problem nobody talks about. Boredom is a modern luxury. When you're bored today, nothing is actually at stake. You reach for your phone, the feeling disappears, and life continues exactly as it was. But 40,000 years ago, empty time wasn't empty. It was time your body still needed to survive the next 6 months. And the humans who filled that time well were the ones whose descendants are still here. You are, statistically, descended from the people who were good at being bored. So what did they actually do with it? The first job was almost never optional. Keep the fire alive. Before roughly 40,000 years ago, researchers still aren't fully certain how reliably early humans could start a fire from nothing. There's evidence of controlled fire use going back at least 400,000 years. But controlling a fire that already exists and creating one from scratch are two completely different skills. If your fire went out during a long stretch of downtime, you might not get it back. Some groups solved this by carrying an ember wrapped in green leaves or packed into a type of woody fungus that could smolder for hours without dying. It was functionally a biological lighter. When researchers found Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old body preserved in the Alps, he was carrying a complete fire kit in his belt pouch: tinder fungus, flint, iron pyrite for striking sparks, extra plant tinder as backup. Even 5,000 years after the invention of agriculture, losing your fire was still serious enough that people carried dedicated equipment to prevent it. So during long idle stretches, someone's entire job might have been sitting beside that fire for hours, feeding it exactly enough, never too much, never too little. That doesn't sound like leisure. It sounds like a shift. But once the fire was stable, the archaeological record shows something strange. People didn't rest. They built. Caves and rock shelters across the world are packed with evidence of manufacturing, not survival. Piles of stone-flaking debris, the tiny chips that fly off when you're shaping a tool, are found concentrated in specific spots, exactly where someone would sit near firelight and work for hours without moving. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a 100,000-year-old ochre processing workshop. Abalone shells used as mixing bowls. Ochre ground into fine powder. Bone tools used to stir it and apply it. This wasn't a task someone did in a hurry. This was a process refined over repeated sessions by someone with nowhere else to be. Then there's the string. At a Neanderthal site in France called Abri du Maras, researchers found a fragment of twisted plant fiber cord, the oldest direct evidence of string ever discovered. At Hohlefels Cave in Germany, they found something even stranger. A 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory, with 4 holes and spiral grooves, built specifically for twisting plant fibers into rope. Someone sat down, with time on their hands, and invented a machine whose only job was to make rope faster. Making rope is slow. It's repetitive. It requires patience most tasks don't. It is, in almost every sense, the perfect bad weather, nothing-to-do task, and rope changed everything downstream of it. Better shelters, snares, traps, tools bound to handles. An enormous share of early human technology runs on a material invented by someone who was, by any modern definition, just filling time. Even comfort got engineered this way. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something unexpected from 77,000 years ago: actual bedding. Layers of sedges, rushes, and grasses deliberately arranged into sleeping mats. The top layer included leaves from a plant called Cape Laurel, a natural insect repellent. The bedding was periodically burned and replaced to stay clean. Someone wasn't just surviving in that cave. They had enough uneventful time on their hands to solve a problem nobody was forcing them to solve. And then, somewhere in that idle time, something happened that still doesn't fully make sense. Chauvet Cave in southern France contains paintings roughly 36,000 years old. Lions, horses, rhinos, bears, rendered with a level of anatomical precision that still stops researchers today. Some animals are drawn mid-stride, muscles tensed, heads turning, the work of someone who had watched these creatures for thousands of hours and then rebuilt them from memory, underground, by the light of burning fat. And here's the detail that makes this stranger than it sounds. These paintings aren't near the entrance, where you'd naturally shelter. They're deep, sometimes hundreds of meters in, through passages you'd have to crawl through on your hands and knees. Someone carried a small stone lamp into total darkness for the sole purpose of making something nobody needed to survive. Nobody paints like that when the hunting is good and the sun is out. You do that when there is nothing left to sharpen, nothing left to mend, and hours of darkness still ahead of you. The most sophisticated creative explosion in human prehistory happened in exactly the places where people had run out of things they had to do. But the most important use of all that idle time wasn't the tools, and it wasn't the art. It was the talking. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study comparing daytime and nighttime conversations among the Jew/Huansi Bushmen of the Kalahari. During the day, people talked about practical things, land disputes, complaints, logistics. But at night, sitting around the fire with nothing else demanding their attention, more than 80% of conversation shifted to stories, songs, and shared history. The firelight itself seemed to change what people were willing to say. Idle time wasn't wasted time, it was transmission time, the hours when survival knowledge and everything else moved from one mind into another. Some of that knowledge lasted far longer than anyone would expect. The oldest verified oral traditions on Earth are Australian Aboriginal stories describing sea level changes that happened roughly 7,000 years ago, confirmed independently by modern geology. A story survived 7,000 years with no writing behind it at all, carried only by people with the time to keep repeating it to each other. That kind of memory doesn't form by accident. It forms because a group spent an enormous number of otherwise uneventful hours doing nothing but sitting together and talking. So, when the hunting was done and the tools were sharpened, and the fire was stable, and there was genuinely nothing left that had to be done, humans didn't shut down. They built rope machines. They ground pigment into paint. They crawled hundreds of meters into total darkness to paint animals no one would ever hunt in that room. They sat by fire and talked until knowledge and stories outlived every person who first spoke them. You still carry that same restlessness. When your hands have nothing to do, something in you starts looking for a project, a story, a reason to make something. That isn't a modern personality trait. That's 40,000 years of ancestors who filled the exact same silence, and the ones who filled it well are the reason you exist at all.